Welcome to another episode of Podcasting in Professional Services. I'm your host, John Tyerman, and today I'm joined by Ross Simmonds, founder and CEO of Foundation Marketing and host of Create Like the Greats podcast. Welcome to the show, Ross.
Thanks for having me on, John. I'm excited to be here and looking forward to diving in and talking all things content, AI, etc., all of that good stuff. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, me too. But before we dive in, Ross, how do I know that this is really you and not an AI-generated avatar?
It's true. Well, the easiest way that you'll be able to pick it out is by the way I pronounce about, out, all of the Canadian accents. The flare-ups happen frequently, and a lot of people can quickly realize that I'm not an AI because the AI has not been able to figure out the Canadian accent just yet.
Well, that's good. Let's stay ahead of that trend.
I like it.
Yeah, that was a really cool video that you put out. I'm sure it was on all the different platforms. I saw it first on X.
Cool.
If folks that are listening, go follow Ross on Twitter, X, at @thecoolestcool.
It's a video of myself that I created in a weekend of an AI version of me talking about things that never actually came out of my mouth. So I used an AI to replicate my voice, replicate the video, and brought it to life. The reason why it's all relevant is because for me, my entire career has been built on the back of experiments. From the moment I was in university, when I first started a fantasy football blog as an experiment to see if I could create content on the internet and get people to listen to me, all the way through to today where I experiment with new channels like Reddit and Quora and Facebook and LinkedIn all the time. Experimentation has been at the heart of a lot of my career. Podcasting has been an experiment for myself. It was about a year and a half ago when I launched Create Like the Greats, which is my podcast, where I interview and talk to some of the greatest creators of all time while also sharing into my world as a creator and some of the experiences that I've gone through. But it wasn't my first podcasting experience. I also have a podcast that if you go deep into the archives, you can find all focused on Superman. So me and my colleague, my friend Jacob, we created this podcast called Superman Reimagined. And essentially we took all of the old archives of Superman because they were over 100 years old. It became open license for anybody to use and repurpose. And we've repurposed all that old footage into something new with new soundtracks, just like the old radio show, but with like better graphics. Well, there's no graphics because it's all audio, but better soundtracks, better beats and things like that. It's just a lot of fun. So long story, a little bit longer. My experience spans across experimentation in podcasting and videography and content marketing, SEO, AI, all of this stuff. I'm just a geek who loves to experiment with things.
Well, let's talk about your how you apply experimentation to your clients. Can you give an overview of Foundation? Who do you help? How do you help them?
Yeah, so Foundation is a B2B content marketing agency. We run some of the biggest content marketing like engines for some of the top brands in the world. So we've worked with everything from the Canvas of the world through to the MailChimps and Unbounces, Eventbrites, those types of organizations. We specialize primarily in B2B. And what we do is we help these organizations create content strategies that are intended to move the needle. So every day we are working with these brands to not only create blog posts, landing pages, ebooks, search optimized assets, but we're also helping them distribute that content. How can they spread it into the channels where their audience is spending time? If their audience is on LinkedIn, then we're creating the playbooks on how they can spread their story there. If their audience is in a community like Reddit, we're giving them the playbooks on how to submit their content into these communities. One of the biggest reasons why Foundation exists is because we have this belief that across a lot of industries and organizations, they make a simple fundamental mistake. They pop the bubbly and celebrate the moment a piece of content goes live and is published, instead of realizing that that's when the beginning of the work actually begins. When you press publish on a podcast, the most important thing that you can do is not to just hit submit and call it a day. It's to actually amplify and promote the podcast that you just did. Find good clips from within that podcast, repurpose them, reshare them, share them on X, share them on LinkedIn, share them on Facebook, share them in your story. You want to repurpose these things that you're creating. And at Foundation, this is what we do every single day. We go out, we repurpose the content that our clients are investing in. We find ways to distribute those stories on their behalf. And in our philosophy and our motto is create once, distribute forever. That's like the MO that we have when it comes to content.
Yeah, that mantra resonates with me, and I've been hearing you say that and reading that from you for years now. And folks that are listening to this might be thinking to themselves, John, this is a podcast about podcasting and professional services. Why have
Right.
Ross on the show? But one
Right.
thing that I've found is that in professional services, because the sales cycles are so much longer, it takes those organizations longer to learn what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah.
And I've spent about a decade of my time in professional services, but I've also spent some time in other industries like B2B software. And
Right.
what I've found is that sector in the B2B SaaS space is a couple steps ahead of where professional services is today. And so that's why I think that your perspective is relevant to this audience, is because you're doing those experiments, you're practicing content distribution for B2B companies. And I think a lot of those same principles can be applied to professional services firms.
We are a professional service firm in many ways, right? Like at Foundation, we work with these companies and we're offering our services. So I completely empathize with the brands who say, yes, but our time to get that contract closed is much more significant than a lot of software companies who might just have a credit card swipe. 100%. I feel you, I hear you, and I recognize that, which is why it's so important to get bought into this idea of distributing things forever. Because when you are creating a case study, it's easy to get caught up into this trap that every single quarter you need to create a new case study. Instead of taking the case study that closed some of your biggest deals and saying, why aren't we sharing that more? Why are we repurposing that more? Why haven't we turned this into a carousel for LinkedIn? Why haven't we written about this on X? Why aren't we promoting this on a podcast, right? Like there are so many things that go into this philosophy and this mindset that can accelerate the rate in which you're actually getting a deal closed. Because when you start to think about it that way, you now have more assets that you can use as touch points to connect with the people who you are trying to close. So if I'm an accounting firm and I'm trying to close another business to be like their go-to accounting partner, there's no better way to like nurture that relationship than to not just follow up and say, hey, checking in, but to say, hey, we just had this podcast that we recorded. I wanted to share it with you. And then saying, hey, I also wanted to share with you this blog post that we wrote back in 2022, but it's still very relevant to you today. When you start to have that type of an organizational thinking, it just changes the way that you operate and show up not only as an organization, but also for your clients.
Yeah. And even if you wrote that blog post in 2022, you can always update the publication date on it and then send it to them. Hey, we just wrote this blog post a couple of months ago, or we just updated it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't think that, like, at the end of the day, the people who seen that piece back in 2022 aren't exactly the same people who are online today, right? So don't be afraid.
Receipts.
Not keeping receipts, reshare that content, like promote it. You want to double down on your greatest hits. Like there's a reason why Taylor Swift can come out with an entire album that is the exact same as one from before, and it still ranks number one. It's because people want good content. And if you have good content that you've already produced, stop letting it collect dust. Bring it back to life, add a little bit of a new flair to it, and give it to people and see how they respond.
Love that. I love that philosophy. So Ross, let's shift gears a little bit, and I'd love to unpack your experience so far. Well, I guess, in the podcasting arena, let's focus on Create Like the Greats and how that podcast impacts Foundation, or how you're using that. For folks who aren't familiar with your show, Create Like the Greats is an investigation and observation of some of the greatest ideas, backgrounds, and strategies used by influential and innovative thinkers. You launched the podcast in November 2022. Let's start here. Why a podcast? Why that medium?
Yeah. So the reason why was I've always been a big believer in the written word, but I'm smart enough to know that not everybody likes to sit down and read a 300 word or 3,000 word blog post. Not a lot of people do. So I came to this realization, arguably and self-admittedly, a little bit late, but a lot of people enjoy listening to long-form audio content. So when I realized this, I was like, we have so much great content that I've written, research that I've done on some of the greatest businesses of all time, greatest people of all time. Why don't I turn this into an audio experience for people? So I started to record it, started to create it, had bounced the idea around with a few folks, and people thought, yes, this is a good idea. And we went full speed ahead at it. Fast forward 100,000 downloads later, and it was a success. People cared about it, people wanted it, and it resonated with folks. So the ROI for Foundation off of this is essentially twofold. One, these ideas and these stories that we are creating on Create Like the Greats resonate with B2B. Like they resonate with SaaS founders, they resonate with our audience, they resonate with people who want to do great things in their own career, in their own life, and create things that are valuable. So we get a lot of people who subscribe to the podcast who might not be obsessed with sitting down and reading 4,000 words of a report or something like that. So it gives us value in that sense. But also, personally, I get a ton of joy out of these conversations and also giving people a glimpse into my world. So there's a subsection of Create Like the Greats called journal entries. And in these journal entries, I take people behind the scenes into the problems I'm facing, the challenges that I'm trying to overcome, experiments that I'm running, events that I'm attending, decisions that I need to make, all of that stuff. And I give people that inner look into my world. And I find that valuable as well, because it gives myself just a bit of a forcing function to say, like, if I go on this podcast and I say, I'm going to create and tinker with audio AI, then I actually have to do it because a bunch of people heard me say it, so I need to live up to it. So it's an accountability factor as well. But all in all, the podcast has been a ton of fun. I love getting the chance to interview and chat with some great people while also doing some amazing research to dive into some of the greatest creations of all time. We had, like, completely outside of marketing, we did this episode where we dove into Prince, the artist formerly known as Prince, and what Prince had created with the Purple Rain, etc. We brought on Prince's first producer to actually come on to our show and talk about watching Prince go through the process of creating one of the greatest albums of all time. And when we talked to them about this experience, there's so many parallels that you can take between a high performer in the music field with a high performer in the business field. And when you combine those things together, a lot of people resonated with the idea that kind of what Prince emulated of consistency, work hard, focus on your craft, and be okay with other people thinking you're a little bit too obsessed with yourself. Sometimes you have to be to kind of do it right. We just have some great episodes and have pulled out some very interesting nuggets.
I think you have to look across different industries, right? You have to. Otherwise, you get stale and you don't learn and you don't grow, because there are things that are working in the music industry, in consumer products, in B2B software that you can apply to all sorts of other industries, including professional services.
Right. I 100% agree.
Fascinating. Well, I'd love to talk more about music. I'm somewhat of a musician myself, but
nice.
Let's go behind the scenes of your podcast, Create Like the Greats. Your mantra is create once, distribute forever. So, how does that play out with your podcast? How do you live that mantra? Can you go kind of behind the scenes? What does a workflow look like for once you record that podcast episode? How do you distribute it so effectively?
Yeah. So the way that we think about it is once the episode is created, we have an asset. And every time you have an asset, you want to get ROI out of it. And I'm talking like good old fashioned finance business terms here, but that's essentially the way that we think of it. We've invested in this asset. It required time to create. Now we need to use it to get as much dividends as possible. And the way that we do that is simple. We now have an audio file. And if it is one that actually takes off, we're going to turn it into a video. We're actually going to find ways to turn that into a video asset, either with myself saying the audio all over again, or we're going to use that video file and we're going to upload it to YouTube. Or what we have done in the past, we will bring in an animator to create an animated graphic around the story that was told. We did this with one episode that broke down the success of the website Masterclass, and it now lives on YouTube with a fully animated experience. Now, that's not where it ends. We also look and see what are the moments within this podcast episode that might have really resonated with people the most. Then we start to cut those up into short clips. Those clips are going to be reshared on social media. We're going to turn them into Reels for Instagram. We're going to turn them into Shorts for YouTube. We're going to turn them into vertical videos for TikTok. And then we're going to circulate those. They all go into a Google Drive that are labeled for their different specs and their formats. And then our team goes and starts to create copy that goes with the different types of video assets, and those start to get scheduled to be shared over the course of the next few months. As those pieces are being shared and distributed, ideally, people are then clicking a link in the bio, which are driving them down to create Like the Greats. They're listening to the podcast, they're consuming it, and they're liking it. They're smashing that subscribe button, and then they're getting more of our content in the future. All that said, we also have emails that go out that would amplify that podcast. So as soon as it goes live, it's going out to our mailing list. I have a link in my signature for every email that actually says subscribe to Create Like the Greats. So everybody's getting that. Check out our latest episode. Our email newsletters are going out to thousands of people 3 times a week. It's promoting the latest episode of Create Like the Greats. I'm taking it and sharing it on my own personal social media account. So it's going out on LinkedIn, it's going up on my Instagram account, and it's probably even going into a few niche communities where my audience are spending time. So if my audience is within a certain Slack group, I might go into that Slack group and say, hey folks, I just launched a new episode about this topic. Check it out. I think you're going to get a lot of value out of it. And then something interesting starts to happen when the community starts to take that content and share it on their own accounts. That's when you know you have a hit. So at this point, a lot of marketers, creators, podcast hosts, etc., would be like, okay, I'm exhausted. And I'd say, yes, you're right. You should be. And I hope you drink a lot of coffee like I do, because it makes it easier to do this stuff. But if you don't, then all you have to do is actually focus on one channel and do the playbook for that. Go on one channel, distribute your content there. Just doing that over and over and over again is more likely to find success than what most people do, which is they press publish, they share it on LinkedIn once, and then they move on to the next episode.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It must take a lot of organization in a team behind kind of like everything, all these different moving parts.
Yeah.
Out of pure curiosity, that workflow that you just explained, how many people have a hand in that workflow?
Yeah, so we have about 3. So I would say there's about 3 people in that workflow. The producer, what we would call like the distributor. So the person who's responsible for creating the content and writing the copy and things like that. And then the actual like video edit person who can like move things around and find and hear the key moments that are worth chopping and skewing and finding those clips. And that's essentially the team. All that said, I do believe if you have a full-time resource, one individual who is trained properly, who has gone through the materials, who has read all of my blog posts, who has went through my distribution courses, all of that stuff, they could probably do this too and run that entire engine on your behalf if they were dedicated and focused on distribution.
Got it. One thing that I noticed that I really liked and picked up on was this concept of you're looking for signals from some of the content that you put out and understanding like, okay, this one feels like a hit because people are sharing it within those niche communities and things like that. That's just one example. Why not start with video? I'm curious. Why record audio and then make the leap?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think video is a great medium. The reason for me not starting with video is because I believe for a great differentiated video experience, it's better to have everyone in the same space. Like I love podcasts that have interview formats where people are in the same space, in the same venue. And that's what I would have tried to emulate and would have tried to do. But I live in Nova Scotia, Canada, and there's not a lot of people over here or coming here. So it was a decision to say, all right, for some of these, let's do it. For interviews, let's do it and see how it goes. But we lean heavily into the audio first approach just because that's where we wanted to start.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, everyone's podcasting journey is different and everyone has different reasons for it. So yeah, I was just curious about that.
Yeah, and I also think it's taken me a long time to figure out what the perfect at-home video setup is for myself. And like, that's just good old transparency. It's like, I probably would have embraced it faster if I could perfect my setup, but I still don't feel like I perfected my setup. So that's a bit of the perfectionist coming out of me, but I need a better setup, I think.
Yeah, well, you're balancing perfectionism with the need to experiment. And those two can be at odds sometimes.
100%.
Ross, let me ask you. So you've been, this isn't your first podcast, Create Like the Greats.
No.
I guess maybe like, what's something, maybe it's a story, maybe it's, something that you learned along the way that caught you off guard in this most recent podcasting venture. With Create Like the Greats.
So one of our formats is probably about an hour-long episode where it's a monologue where I take people into the data, the background, the history of how some of these organizations were created, founded, how they grew. We dive deep into data around like their organic growth, how much traffic they're generating, how much sales they're generating. And I was ridiculously surprised by how much time it takes to create those types of episodes. I thought I could turn on a camera, turn on a microphone and record and it would be done very quickly. But there's a lot of takes. There's a lot of edits. There's a lot of research that goes into it. There's a lot of script writing. You can't just say, ChatGPT, write this script for me. There's a lot of work that goes into it. And I did not know that it would take as much time as it actually does.
Wow. So I think that just kind of goes to show that great content requires a lot of upfront work, research, preparation, kind of accumulating data so that you can talk about it coherently and package it up in a way that's digestible for your audience, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's an important point. Where do you plan on taking the show from here?
Yeah, I think we want to do more of those in-depth breakdowns. So we want to go deeper into some of the best creations of all time. We want to interview some other great creators, some people who are doing some interesting things in the space. And I want to give people an even more raw look behind the scenes into the things that I'm working on. Like I'm working on right now, writing a book, and I want to get an episode up very soon that talks about what that process has been like and what the struggles were, the challenges were, where we are today, where it's going, all of that stuff, the reason behind writing the book, all of that stuff. I want to start giving people more of that type of material and that type of content so they can follow along the journey as I go through this wild thing called entrepreneurship. So more transparency, more in-depth breakdowns, and of course, more experiments across the board as well.
Excellent. Well, I'm looking forward to following along with Create Like the Greats and seeing how that show evolves and following along with your journey. What I'd love to do, Ross, is just shift gears just a little bit and talk about artificial intelligence in podcasting.
Let's do it.
In one of your recent episodes, you call your journal entries, you talked about why unscalable content is the future of SEO. And I think that's important, especially within the context of AI generated content. In my opinion, I believe that it's more like a race to the middle of sorts.
Right. Yeah. It's a great way to put it.
And I think that podcasts are essentially like the best way that expertise-based businesses like professional services firms can create differentiated content. Thinking through the lens of how firms in those kinds of industries, how can you balance using AI and everything, all the benefits that come with that, with the human element of marketing and keeping that intact? Like how do you think firms should balance that?
Yeah, I think everyone needs to view artificial intelligence as an augmentation tool. So pretend that you're Tony Stark and an AI is your Iron Man suit kind of thing, right? Like you don't want to completely replace yourself and your style, your charisma, your approach to client service and connection with an AI, but you're going to let AI help you do things faster, to know more about your customer faster, to better understand the person on the other end of an email better. Like all of these things can be your superpower, and you can be more human because a lot of the robotic and automated things can be replaced. So we can use AI to replace the need for me to go into my inbox and see who I need to follow up with. We can use AI to go through my inbox and identify whose birthday it is that I may have missed. Like these are things that as a human, you should do, but you probably don't have a lot of time to do it and do it from a way that feels authentic. But thanks to AI, you can now have an assistant that lives with you all the time, doing these things and following up with you all the time. And I think that's where the value is. Value is in still embracing and doing the things that are unscalable as a human, but using AI to get to a point where you're able to do it much more fast and much more efficiently than you could have before. That's where I think the key is for a lot of professional service companies.
I noticed you did not mention content generation as part of that.
Yeah. So I think a big mistake that a lot of people are making with AI today is the assumption that AI should replace all of your content creation efforts. Top to bottom, we'll use AI to write all our blog posts, write all our LinkedIn updates, to write all our LinkedIn responses. I don't believe that's the right approach. I think the right approach might be to use AI to get you to like a draft. And once you have that draft or first draft, you're going to go through it as an expert, as a human, and as somebody who's ideally a leader in your space, and take that piece from a 5 out of 10 to a 10 out of 10. And that's where you're going to find the difference. The difference comes from somebody who's able to do that over and over again versus the person who could take a piece from 0 to 10, but doesn't have the time, to now taking a piece that's almost there from AI and taking it to completion. So in the content creation process, I think AI does play a role, but I don't think it plays the full role. I think it needs humans to take it from mediocre to excellent. I don't think there's any AI asset out there or AI tool that can create a top selling, best blog post that you have ever written or ever seen before. I just don't think it's possible today. No matter how good you are at prompts, I don't think you're going to get that out of AI today. But what I think you will get is a pretty good piece, a piece that could probably replicate a lot of marketers today. And mediocre marketers make up the vast majority of the industry. So I think AI will replace mediocrity. But through that, I believe the excellent writers will be able to build more excellent work faster, and they'll be able to create it more efficiently than they ever did before.
Totally. Yeah. I'm experiencing that myself. I use a tool called Whisper, and essentially what you do is you upload podcast audio, and it spits out like a blog post, LinkedIn posts, tweets, and just kind of creates that like as an output, and you can tune each of those. But what I found is, the blog content that's generated, again, you still need to go in and edit it and pull quotes from your transcript and all that thing to flesh it out.
Right. That's cool. Yeah, we've been using distribution.ai for that, and it's a similar kind of technology and tool. It's fascinating times to be in this space.
Yeah, totally. So Ross, we talked a little bit about that video that you put up on X at the beginning of this podcast episode.
Yeah.
I'm curious, do you think prospective buyers of expertise-based services, sure, but even software products, do you feel like people who watch those kinds of videos, their trust has been betrayed once they learn that it's AI generated?
That's a great question. I think a lot of people in the next 24 months are going to consume a lot of AI generated video content and not know that it's an AI on the other end of it. And arguably, they won't feel any type of way because they'll never know that it wasn't created by an AI. Now, looking back, 24 months from now, they look back and they'll be like, oh, that video that hooked me into scheduling that call was actually an AI. That wasn't actually a personal loom that they sent me. That was an AI talking and it said my name. That was an AI. That will happen. I 100% believe that. But I think for a lot of professional service companies, if you can get ahead of it now and you can leverage these technologies at scale, you're going to be able to win a lot of new relationships at scale that you weren't able to win before because you are embracing this type of technology. Will people be upset in the future? I think they will if you do not deliver on the work that you promised them and you weren't actually a good partner. But by that time, ideally, you've given them enough value that they're a customer forever in life and they want to work with you for a long time. So yeah, I do hear you. I think there is going to be a bit of a pushback across a lot of folks where they'll say this was just created by AI. I already see it today. There's a lot of emails that show up in my inbox and I'm like, ChatGPT wrote all of that. I'm not replying back to this. And I think we're going to go through 2 periods specifically in sales associated with AI. I think the first one is going to be a gold rush. I think a lot of people are going to use AI to unlock some ridiculous amounts of wealth in the next 24 months. But then I think after that period, we're going to see a significant backlash through Google, through inbox, through all of the scripts where it's going to start to block all of this mass communication. We're going to see humans starting to tune out more from the subject lines. Personalization is going to be seen as, I don't know if that was you or an AI, and everybody's blockers are going to be up. So I think we're going to go through a very interesting time where it's going to be a boom, and then we're going to start to see people pushing back thinking, I don't know what to trust anymore.
It's just fascinating to see all the different ways that this could play out because I think that what you say makes total sense. I can also see scenarios where there are going to be those businesses that they experience that gold rush, right?
Yeah.
But I also see, a long-term play where, there's going to be businesses who double down on not using AI and making that a point of differentiation.
Right.
And I could see merit to that strategy as well.
True.
Right. So well, I guess we'll see how it kind of plays out.
100%.
Well, Ross, this has been just a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your experience podcasting, your knowledge of what you found with all of these experiments that you're running, everything you're doing with Foundation. If folks that are listening to this, if they're not already following you, which I don't know why they wouldn't be following you in the first place, but if they want to connect with you, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me on all your favorite social media channels. I'm on LinkedIn. Just do a quick search for Ross Simmonds. I also have a handful of courses on LinkedIn. I'd love for you to check those out as well. And you can also find me at rossimmonds.com. That's my personal website. I have a newsletter, and if you're interested in learning more about my book, you can definitely subscribe, and I'll let you know when that's live. And I love connecting with like-minded folks who are looking to elevate themselves. And John, I just want to say kudos to you for all the work that you do to elevate the community and the service world. And thank you for having me on.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Ross.